All right, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Teacher Talk with Doc Rocker. As always, I'm your host, Russ Downey, and with me as always is Danton Arlotto of Doc Rocker Music. And as you may have noticed, we have some guests today. So with us today are both vocalist Rachel Kobernick and Angie Grau. And for today's episode, we're going to be kind of revisiting some of our points from last week's episode about the importance and the benefits of teaching instrumentalists how to sing. And we figured that for myself and Danton and Carson, seeing as we're instrumentalists first and singers second, we're not the best of authorities to talk about it. So it would be very helpful to have some vocalists onto the show to kind of, let us know what's what and explain that, whether we're way off base or we're, kind of starting down the right path, if you will. So I figured I would introduce both of you and give you a chance to kind of explain, your background as a vocalist, your education, your experience, even vocal range or type, and you can kind of get a chance to talk a little bit about yourself. So let's go in alphabetical order here. So Angie, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Angie Grau. I am a Boston-based soprano. Let's see a little bit about me. So I actually went to college with Danton. We went to Westchester University where I studied music ed. And then I decided that classroom teaching wasn't for me. So I moved to Boston and I got my master's degree in vocal performance from the Longy School of Music of Bard College. And throughout this whole journey of life and education, I found that private lesson instruction has been like my huge passion. I've been teaching privately ever since, I think 2013. So I've got a little bit of experience in my belt. What else was I going to say? Oh, so I mostly sing opera and classical music. In Boston, it can be very tricky because we're the land of too many sopranos. We have 5 conservatories in the area, so we're just churning them out. So a big point of pride for me is in the city, I have done a lot of self-produced recitals. I wasn't hired, so I was going to do it myself. And it's been a blast being up here. My main goal too as an educator, which is why I'm really happy to be on this podcast, is to dismantle the elitism in classical music. This music's for everybody. It's not just for a certain group of people. And for me, teaching singing is a great way to do that. So
that is a very good point. Well, we'll have to definitely bring you back because we had our very first episode. We talked a little bit about that sort of idea of how classical is kind of this whole separate world that kind of gets turned off from a lot of music students, and why we think that's really a very awful, crying shame. So, and it's one of those topics we definitely want to circle back to in the future. So, mad respect for you for sticking it to the man and doing it yourself. I can resonate with that a lot, and it's really cool to see that you got into private teaching just like I did. Because we pretty much started in the same, almost the same class. I know I started there in 2010, so I don't know if you were already there or if
you were a year ahead of me.
Oh, okay. So you were coming in and both of us kind of starting in that same camp of education. You want to go to be a public school teacher, and funny enough, now we're not really doing that at all, but we're still making a difference on a lot of people. So very cool. It's super awesome to have you here. So
next, looks like I missed you by a year, I guess.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. So with that, let's transition to our other guest here today. I'd like to introduce her really quick because she's one of our own teachers for Doc Rocker Music Academy. Rachel, we just onboarded her during the pandemic in the middle of summer in the most dead season. We ended up crossing paths, and she decided that she's like, yeah, you know what, I want to try teaching lessons. I think I could do it online, and we had an interested student and they just hit it off, and it's been great since. So mad kudos. I'm super happy to have Rachel on board, both on with the team at the Academy and here in today's podcast. So Rachel, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. We met very serendipitously.
Oh, yeah.
Connections. I'm actually from Westchester. It's where I grew up. I completely agree with everything Angie said, having been in that classical world pretty much my entire life. I'd love to stick it to the man. So if we ever do that, I'd love to be a part of it. Yes, my name is Rachel Kobernick. I just recently graduated from Eastman School of Music with my bachelor's in vocal performance, and I just moved to Cincinnati, and so I started my first year of my master's at CCM. and it's craziness, but it's happening. So that's all good things. Also in vocal performance, I am so interested in this entire thing because I really just started teaching this summer. And it's been wonderful. I have mostly 7-year-olds. And it's so cool because to me, I mean, I never even studied music ed or thought it would. I mean, obviously as a performer and a musician, teaching is always going to be a part of your career. And I absolutely love children, so it blended very easily, I found. And yeah, it's just incredible to be able to feel like you're semi-influential when they're that young and just introducing music to their lives. So I've found that part really fulfilling thus far. But yeah, I'm a soprano as well. There's a ton of us everywhere.
Sopranos stick together.
Sopranos. Yeah, and I've basically just been kind of during the pandemic trying to also find as many outlets as possible to sing and perform. People are being really creative. Here we're doing masked, distanced scenes, and people seem like they're really trying to kind of make music happen. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely happening, and that's really cool. So yeah, glad to hear.
Well, I guess we'll kind of get to the main deal for today's episode, if you will. Like I said before, in our previous episode, we kind of talked about teaching instrumentalists to sing, and we wanted to have you on, obviously, to hear both your opinions on it and some methodologies that you would apply to it. So really, I kind of figured we would start with 3 main questions or 3 main conclusions that we kind of reached from last week. So the first one is, in your opinion, when it comes time for instrumentalists, why do their singing skills get neglected, in your opinion, when they're learning? And Angie, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think there's a multitude of reasons for this happening. The first being a lot of ignorance about vocal technique. I've heard lots of people, oh, it's not hard, everybody can sing, or everyone's favorite, that singers aren't musicians. I'm sure Rachel's heard that one before too.
Singers and musicians, everyone always likes to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they love to say that. It's not offensive or anything.
Same rap too. It's really a shame.
I'm gonna start saying instrumentalists and musicians.
Yeah, just out of spite, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately, all of us pianists are safe. No one can deny what we are. Whatever we are.
And really sadly, too, I think there are 2 kind of sad points, I think, about why these skills get neglected. Is firstly, I think chances are somebody told them as a young child that they can't sing. Mm-hmm. Somebody said, oh, stop. Oh, it sounds bad. They very passively, offhandedly would make a comment like that. Mm-hmm. Oh, kids remember that stuff. And I think that trauma is something, once it's there, it's really, really hard to get rid of, because singing is something that's so personal. On the school side of things, I think that there is a huge assumption, I don't know if it's conscious or not, but that the elementary general music curriculum is enough of exposure to singing and to singing technique. And from what I do remember about classroom teaching, even like Kodai, which is, the solfege syllables, do, re, mi, etc., that's primary goal is ear training, not
proper singing technique.
And so everything, I don't know if people just don't realize it till later or what, but that's what I think.
I think there's also some difficulty because in a lot of ways you can't really start teaching pedagogically until a person is a certain age. And so before that, I think absolutely it has to be like an emphasis on a love of using your voice and your instrument and confidence to open your mouth, because it is really interesting. Like, I feel like as young kids, there's a lot of lack of inhibition. They're very happy to do anything you ask them, and any sound to make anything, and they're like, yeah, I'll go. But once they're like 12, 13, then that like sort of shyness and embarrassment starts to sneak in. I think if you don't like continue to encourage through that, then a lot of people would much rather, not that playing an instrument is any less expressive, but would much rather express themselves in maybe that more protected way, somewhat. But then, I think just the issue with people not feeling like you can actually train, because like 13, 14 is iffy for teaching like proper technique. So I think maybe people don't know what to do with kids that age when the development is most important in terms of loving singing. And then there's also that idea that similarly like what Andrew's saying about exposure. Like even the ones like those of us who end up doing opera, like I don't think I even knew what opera was until I was 16. I had never even experienced it before. And somehow, like, I think those of us who end up doing opera didn't hear of it until much later. And so I don't know if even exposing kids earlier would be helpful, but I sure didn't have it. So I don't know if it exists.
I'm in that camp too. I saw my first opera freshman year of college.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, light bulb.
Oh yeah, this is cool.
Maybe this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I think like exposing the already musically inclined to opera maybe would like turn on a bunch of bulbs.
Yeah. I mean, actually, both of you raise a really good point. And the one thing that I think is rather interesting is that concept of, Rachel, I believe it was you that said this, that little kids or younger kids, even up to like a certain age, if you ask them to sing, they're like, oh yeah, sure, no problem, I could sing. That's not an issue.
Yeah, middle school, whole different story.
Well, I think like you have to build that motivation before they get to that age, because like once they get to that age, it's like, oh, everybody's watching me. I don't want to sing for anybody ever at all.
It's really vulnerable. It's like one of the most vulnerable things you can do.
Well, one of the points we raised was that, and you know, like I said, myself, Danton, and Carson, who's not here today, we kind of raised the point that a lot of us who started as instrumentalists could kind of hide behind our instruments a little bit. I know as a drummer, I can literally hide from view behind a drum kit. So, you know, and the funny part is that like I wouldn't call it any kind of proper vocal training as a kid. I sung in some choirs as a child and mostly learned how to sing like from my dad, who was in a band for years, and sing harmonies from it, but I didn't have like proper vocal training. And I still wasn't crazy about like the idea of getting up in front of people and singing. I'd rather like play drums behind an entire concert band where like people don't watch me particularly. So it's a good point. And I guess my question there is that like, is that the reason why it gets neglected? Because, you know, it's tough to get them engaged in that interest in wanting to sing if they don't start early enough? Or is it something where, you know, even the person who's teaching them may have went through that themselves? I guess that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Yeah, you could definitely talk about that from the perspective of, especially us like instrumental teachers, of, you know, probably for every one of us that's okay with teaching voice and, you know, exploring the possibilities of that, there's always probably 5 or 6 other teachers that are like, no, I hated singing growing up. I hated doing all the voice classes in college. I hated singing in choir. As soon as I get to that point where I'm on the podium, I'm never going to make my kids sing, you know, kind of like trying to provide what they think is a better experience. But then you're actually detracting your future generation of students from that opportunity to explore music in a whole different way. That just didn't work for that particular teacher. I mean, I'm not pointing a finger and saying I know anybody that falls into that gamut, but I can speak from the perspective on the other side of it, from being a really well-trained piano student who was never really taught too much about sight reading, to then getting to that point when I became a professional and it kind of caught up to me. And now it's like my personal vocation as a piano teacher. All my students have to learn sight reading because I didn't have that. So it can be kind of the flip side of like, well, I had singing and I hated it, so I want to make sure my next students never have to suffer that. You know, like, we're here for instrumental. We don't need to worry about singing because we're controlling bow strokes instead of wind and breath. So, I mean, it's just a theory. But maybe you guys can elaborate on that a little bit or get into some other points.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors potentially in even just the student-teacher pair of whether singing is even emphasized, especially like you're saying with the teacher's specific background. Because my personal pathway, which I always find really interesting, is I also started with piano and played until I was 14, 15, and it was my piano teacher who said, oh, you should study voice, because she also taught voice. Yeah, and she taught voice first. So that is like, she was a voice teacher who also taught piano.
And now you're essentially the opposite.
So I was her piano student, right. who she was just so enthusiastic about singing, and that like really translates. And I think that's a big part of it, with like the perspective of the teacher, but also you really have like to pursue it. I think it really takes a certain type of kid. Like some people you can just tell. Like
if they have the personality for it, yeah.
It's a personality thing. Like if they're like putting themselves out there and so confident and just you know, you can tell when someone really needs to get themselves out of themselves. And I think suggesting potentially singing is a good way. But if I mean, everyone goes through stages, but I think forcing a very shy would rather play person to sing is not always, like, maybe the teacher can sense that and was like, all right, we'll stick with this. You know,
that actually brings up a really good point, because so much of an element of private teaching is that literal personal connection between the student and the teacher, which I feel, I mean, from my limited classroom teaching, I mean, I student taught my semester to get my certification, but I haven't done anything since. But that included middle school choir and elementary general music. And I mean, I loved both placements, had a blast. But the whole point of this was, like, you know, learning that on a private level, you can get that vibe from a student of, oh, this girl might be really interested in maybe transitioning from a pianist into a singer, and working on the two in tandem and using them to supplement each other and take herself to a whole different avenue of what she can do musically. And then there's, for every student like that, there's another student you can get that, like, all right, like, I mean, I can speak from personal experience as a piano teacher. I have a particular piano student that I've had for years, and he's one of my best players. Never performs. And like, I know he hates performing. He doesn't like the idea of doing a recital and getting up in front of people. He just, like, piano's like his thing that he does in his room, and he's great at it. And probably none of his friends know that he plays. And that's okay, because he's getting something out of it that's really, you know, intrinsically valuable to him. And that's all that I really want from that. So there's always that. On a private level, you can really quickly get to the point where you understand a student personally. And that might be a big part of why somebody like an ensemble instrumental teacher in a classroom doesn't have the luxury of kind of putting the feelers out for that sort of thing, because you're not working with just one kid where you could get that vibe. I mean, not to say that a public school teacher doesn't have that level of emotional empathy with their students. Many of them probably do, and they're probably fantastic at it. And I can't imagine knowing 30 people at once on that level that I know my private students on. But I'm sure it's possible, but it's definitely got to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, that I can speak to a little bit. Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No,
I was going to say, it's funny that you bring up student teaching, because that's the last time I taught a classroom. Well, yeah, that was the last time I was in charge of a classroom. And I taught high school choir and elementary general. But the high school choir, this is how I knew, like, I had it in the back of my mind that the classroom wasn't for me, was because every time I would get observed, or anytime, like, even my cooperating teacher would comment on my feedback when I lead rehearsals, is, you're spending too much time on technique. We have to rehearse the music. We can't just, like, get them to be better singers. And I was like, but this could be the only outlet they're going to have for this stuff. Like, so I was like, ugh. So in my mind, it kind of planted the seed in the back of my brain. I'm like, well, where can I teach this technique? You know? And then you come back to my voice lesson, and I was like, oh, here.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's so, I like laugh at it so hard thinking back.
That's a super relevant point too, because like we even talked about this before, that there's this balance between concert deadline and actually teaching how to be a musician. And the funny part is that was kind of what my like second question was getting to, was that like I think a big part of it is this lack of vocal training that comes along with it. Even for those who aren't primarily vocalists, is like, there's not enough time to actually like teach somebody to be like a complete musician. It's like,
it's rep. Concerts coming up. You gotta get ready for the performance.
I didn't have technique until college.
Yeah. I feel like many of us probably didn't.
Yeah.
Unless we had it through a private teacher.
Oh yeah, the technique I was taught.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. The choral technique that I was taught was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It set me up for college. Not so great.
Yeah, Angie, that would be a really interesting thing for us to get to, because I want to talk a little more about that, especially now since we have 2 singers with us and 2 voice teachers on the private level, and on someone who has some, even if it's limited, someone who has some classroom experience. In my experience as a voice teacher, there's always like that sort of whole negative stigma to it of like, there's like all these teachers out there that are teaching wrong technique, and I have like so many like high school age kids that like my teacher taught me to do these certain things and I learned that was wrong and he's terrible and I hate him. And like, there's like, not to like stereotype and over dramatize the situation, but I've heard students give me that kind of feedback from previous vocal experiences with other teachers. And that really scared me. And that was what kind of pressured me to like be really technique oriented and do all of like the voice supplements as a college major at Westchester. Was like, I want to make sure that I'm doing like proper technique, because the last thing I want is for a student to say that about me, let alone teach a student to do something that's going to make him or her hurt their voice. Because that's another factor, is the physical anatomy of the instrument that you have to maintain. And, and that can be really interesting for us to maybe do a little tangent in this episode and talk a little bit about that. I'd love to explore that avenue of vocal pedagogy with both of you, if possible.
Go for it.
Yeah, totally. There's so many things, and that stigma is so very much accurate. Just to bounce back briefly before we move forward to the choir thing, it's so difficult to teach any technique in that setting because the technique that you need for a choir and an ensemble is vastly different, and it's just hard. And a lot of young singers are technically taught in that way, and then have to undo a lot of those things, because basically, I feel like the basis of singing is like freedom and releasing everything. And a lot of times if a choir of 40 people were to sing their bestest voice, it would sound
terrible, because nobody would blend it.
So you're taught to not do that in any way.
Yeah, so you kind of put this like all these little filters and stifles.
Yeah, and it just
over the student.
a lot of tension, and then you spend years trying to undo it.
Yeah, you have to wear a lot of hats. There's a lot of hats.
But I think the thing with the teacher, go ahead. You're gonna hit on this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't fault my high school choir director for teaching me how to sing well in choir. That I want to make sure I get out in case she sees this.
Well, whatever. This is all just shooting the bit for fun. So
no, Rachel's so right. Like the technique, even now, like I sing with a professional choir, and I have my voice lesson the next day, and without fail, my teacher, her name's Jane, she'll be, you had choir last night, didn't you? Because like I do something,
a trained professional can hear it.
Is happening, some vowel is wrong, something is off, because I totally agree with Rachel on that. Solo singing is all about freedom and about, letting your truest voice shine through. Mm-hmm. But choral singing is, what am I saying? Whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. Right. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's like those hats of even like as a performer,
right? As a professional singer,
never taught that. Yeah, and that's what's I think can be challenging is if a choir director is the only source of vocal technique education or vocal education for a student. If that choral director doesn't at least let them know, hey, choral singing is different than solo
really with
singing.
that emphasis on the ensemble, like this is what you do when you sing with a section as opposed to what you do when you sing a solo.
Mm-hmm.
That's really
so I try to at least let them know, be like my students, I have some yeah, and I have a lot of like awesome. Most of my students are more adult or college aged, and but they're non-music majors, and so it's interesting when I I sang in chorus in high school, I love singing, and then
you're already piecing together all the stuff you have to undo and unteach them.
Yeah, let's unpack this a little bit. Yeah. And it's funny because going into something really specific about choral is like standing, because so many people never tell you to don't lock your knees,
and then you pass out.
So and then you pass out, and
yeah.
So it's funny, like there's many different. There's so much, and I think that's kind of what I love about the voice is that
there's so many mysteries to solve. It's like it's like putting puzzles together, and you just have like thousands and thousands of pieces.
Yeah, it's like,
and it's never done.
Yeah, your instrument is invisible to you, and you're training all of these muscles. You're mostly untraining muscles that you can't directly communicate with. And it's breakable, which is the scary part. I mean, I think going back to what you were saying before about all like the stigmas and the difficulty in teaching voice, yeah, it's like, I mean, if you drop your French horn and there's a dent in the bell, then at least you can see it.
You can take it to a tech and have them knock that dent out. If you do something to one of the chambers in your larynx, you are done.
Right. But I think the difficulty with specific voice teachers and having a bad experience is I think there's a lot of tendency to want to teach from the way you've learned and what works for you. And even now, like even for me, like that's been the most difficult thing starting, is to realize that not everyone works the way that you do, and what's comfy for you might not be comfy for them. And like you just have to be really have an open enough relationship with your students for them to be able to say like, this is comfortable. Or even just getting to a point in training where you as yourself can say like, oh, that was comfortable and everything I've been doing before wasn't comfortable. And that, I feel like that takes a while to get to, and just kind of, you know, treading lightly until you feel like you're at that point of communication can be really beneficial.
Yeah, and
yeah,
very
there's
much
so much trust.
Yeah,
trust.
trust is a really important word in this case, because just
it's not
like
just for the student too, it's with the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I stand by that singing is one of the most personal acts that somebody can do. And so in order for the teacher to really have a good experience, not only do you have to trust the student, but the student has to trust you, and like not only for the health of their voice
mm-hmm.
and for their confidence as a singer, but I think also just for the ability to play and take risks in music making and to really discover your best musical self. That's a whole personal endeavor. And the fact that people trust me to help them with that,
it's very humbling.
Honored.
Yeah.
So honored.
Yeah. There's a lot of cathartic crying in voice lessons. I don't know if that happens in other instruments.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just like,
I think the crying in instrumental lessons is not out of catharsis. It's definitely from something else. But
on the other side, yeah.
Talking a little more about like that personal aspect and how personal it is to be a singer and how much you have to like expose yourself and how that can be so problematic when you're tasked with teaching a school full of children. It's just as much that personal shedding of all of those concealments for the teacher to say like, I only know so much. My experience has only done this and that for me. And I've never tried singing this with that technique. I've never tried doing this with that technique. And to really kind of put yourself on the floor and wear your heart on your sleeve as a teacher and say, I really don't know all the answers to this. Again, it goes back to that theme of trust where, the teacher is putting just as much trust into the student as they are to the teacher. I've never really thought of it that way. That's really, really interesting.
Well, it brings up a good point. And, the funny part is I've spent parts of the last 6.5 years teaching public school, both as, some long-term substitutions and just as a general music sub in general. And it's interesting because there's a different dynamic at each level. Like at the elementary level, you as the teacher, the students expect you to know everything for every answer they ask you, no matter how complicated it may be or how mundane it may be. But the further up you go, especially when you get to high school, they still kind of expect you to know the answers, but at least it's a little bit more understandable to say, yeah, I've never dealt with that before, but let's see if we can find out something about it, which is good because, I don't know if I would have necessarily recognized it as a student at the time, but if my teacher told me, hey, I don't know a whole lot about this, but let's see if we can figure this out, I'd be like, okay, cool, that'd be great. Like, you kind of gain like a respect for them in doing that. But it's so much of a different style compared to teaching, private lessons. Like I've only been teaching lessons for about, what is it, Dan? Like close to 4 years now, I think, something like that.
4 or 5 years. Yeah.
I spent a few years just in the public school system before I even, started teaching private lessons. And it definitely helped me become a better teacher, starting to teach private lessons, but they are so vastly different. The time management.
Whole different world. There's a reason that you need an education background to work in a school, but you can use an education or a performance background to be a private teacher. So many successful private teachers. Look at Angie. So many successful private teachers are mainly performance focused. Rachel, same story. Me, same story. I mean, I switched out of music ed halfway through and did piano performance. And then I fell into private teaching like while I was still a student in college. And even since before that, but I'll talk about myself some other time. That's not why we're here. But that point of like, there's a little bit more flexibility in being a private teacher. And I think for a lot of us private teachers, that could be kind of intimidating, especially those of us that are more in the education side, because it's like, well, where's the curriculum? Where's the template? Where's the standards I have to follow? And that was a big thing that Russ and I would talk about so much when he first jumped on board at the school I was working at the time. Cause here comes Russell from this, strongly like education-based background to like this really, really lax private school where like you could just kind of do whatever you want. And students have a lot of creativity and a lot of say in what they do in the lessons. And it's a totally different end of the spectrum. I remember following up with the manager afterward and like, so how did things go with the interview? And they were almost humored by like how well prepared Russ was for the interview, because he went in there with like lesson plans and curricula and like all these different like resources and materials that all the rest of us weren't even touching with a 10-foot pole. But that's neither here nor there. But like, even it's funny how you can kind of take even some of the differences from private to public school teaching and kind of tie that together back here in the voice world of, since there are differences between being a solo singer and being a choral singer, there's that different experience of working with your choral teacher in high school and working with a private coach in lessons. So maybe you guys can elaborate a little more on that, and then we can maybe get to one of our later points here. I know we have a nice little kind of outline that we have cooked up. Yeah, so
I just think like my current experience, I feel like is kind of really just lends well to this whole idea that you're talking about of just trusting and working with people and seeing their method of just like, it's so nice for me to be in my personal voice lesson with my teacher who I adore, and then seeing how like she teaches me so much like in an hour, not only about like singing but like how to teach, and then you go teach your own lesson and then you're like, oh, the way I just said that would work better if I said like it worked for me, so why can't I like transfer this kind of thought process. And it's so exciting because I'm like, I'm working with my teacher on blah blah blah, and like to kind of just show them that it never ends.
Yeah, that's super fun. I miss that. I really miss that part of this of the journey. Once you graduate and you're not taking lessons anymore and you're on your own, it's a whole different world, and it's so much darker and scarier than when you have that awesome support system every week.
Yeah,
I love that as a private teacher. Go ahead.
And then just at the same time, like, I'm sure Angie also has this experience, like the relationship that you have with your private teacher versus coaches is different. And I think it affects the way you sing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And like, I don't know if you feel like you have to be like a certain type of on for a certain person, and then everything like, it's just when your body is your instrument, like anything could happen.
Yeah. And there's a lot more extraneous factors. When you don't have a physical instrument to hold, when you're the instrument, it's everything's different.
Yeah, and then you're really paranoid all the time. But anyway.
Oh yeah, I think about that scene from Step Brothers all the time.
Oh, at the end when they try to get
no, before the Catalina wine mixer. Before that, when oh my gosh, what's his name?
Brennan. Because he can
Will
sing.
Ferrell,
it's like,
and
yeah,
then
you have the
other
voice
guy.
of an angel, blah blah blah, and
he's like, sing for me right now, and he's like, there's dust in the air, and I have a cold, and I ate 20 minutes ago, and it's like all these things. The last time I watched that movie, I just cracked up because it was too real. It hurt my feelings.
So many of those things are true, right?
Yeah. You're like, oh, I haven't warmed up. Oh, I ate 40 minutes ago. Can't do that. Gotta risk the reflux. Oh gosh, the weather, my allergies are just terrible. I haven't had water in forever. It's like there's so many things.
The amount of sleep you had the night before, how well you were sleeping, what level of deepness of your sleep you were in, all of those are factors. The temperature of the room, like is it air conditioned in the middle of the summer and you're coming in from hot, humid, muggy outside into like a freezing cold air conditioned room, and then you have to sing a high C.
Just started to take allergies as a baseline and just go from there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The list goes on and on.
Oh yeah.
That's a whole other episode. Outside extraneous factors on vocal lessons.
And when to cancel your voice lesson.
When to
Instead
cancel
of being
voice
sent
with
out of
Rachel
it,
and Angie. There we go.
Yeah.
Episode 26 is in the works already.
Well, I mean, it's funny too, because like you make a good point. Like all those things are really rather important to like if you can actually perform up to the standard you'd like to. I know like as an instrumentalist, I wouldn't really think twice about sitting down behind a drum kit, and the only factor there would be, am I awake?
Yeah.
Am I alive and breathing?
Yeah, you got all the fingers, everything you need.
Which is probably why we get the reputation we do to some extent. It's kind of funny too, because even approaching like as a singer, I am nowhere near close to what I would consider to be like properly trained technique wise, because a lot of it was just learned as I grew up. So from that side of it, and even speaking for some instrumentalists who also sing as well, I wouldn't even think to bother to think about the weather. I know I made the mistake quite a few times of having like the windows down in my Jeep as I drive home, and it's like 50 degrees outside and singing Rush or Yes at full tilt. So yeah, I probably made quite a few mistakes with that and paid for it for the next 2 weeks. But I figured, if I lose my voice, it just drops like half an octave, and I can start singing lower stuff than I normally do. So it's a wonderfully chaotic way to think about it.
You are giving these two ladies nightmares right now.
Trust me, I believe it. This is why I'm like,
because they never want to hear from their students. Oh yeah, I just like totally like went all out and belted this stuff for like 2 hours, and now I got half my voice range is gone. So oh well, I'll just sing lower stuff.
Yeah,
they're pretty hard.
This is why I'm keeping my mouth shut mostly.
It'd be funny. I had one student who was a bartender. And
that's
she had many a Friday afternoon lesson saying, "Sorry, I closed last night and it was Thirsty Thursday." I was like, "Oh, I know. You don't gotta tell me, girl."
Oh man.
But, it's meeting people where they're at, and that's okay. And
yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
I don't judge. I don't care. As long as you're not hurting yourself.
Right. That's the
only
important thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing, and this is another tangent, unfortunately, I'm already getting way off the point. One thing I did want to ask you both is that, like, how do you approach singing non-classical stuff? Like, if you want to sing like a pop tune or a rock tune, yeah, like I'd love to hear this, because there again, most of my vocal experience I had like maybe the 3 classes I had to take at Westchester for like vocal stuff.
Which you barely scratch the surface when you do that.
Yeah, and I'm like, all my singing experience comes from like in my car and behind a drum kit, whatever limited amount that may be. Like, how do you approach singing that kind of stuff? I mean, it's a totally different world, I would imagine.
I'm curious to hear what Rachel has to say.
Yeah, I mean, I love all styles. I was the biggest musical theater geek, like growing up, did all the high school musical, everything. The reason my piano teacher was like, "You should sing," was because I used to write these dumb pop songs like Sarah Bareilles style, and then
there is nothing dumb about Sarah Bareilles. You take that back.
No, there's nothing dumb about Sarah Bareilles. Mine weren't so great. But we tried. But yeah, I mean, technically, like pedagogically, I mean, your voice is so capable of so many things. And I think one of the biggest stigmas to kind of erase is that like one style is better than the other, or that MT is bad. I mean, I think that stigma probably comes from the fact that it might be slightly easier to hurt yourself if you're belting constantly, but there are ways to do it healthily, and that so many people do, and it's incredible. It's literally just the difference of like you're tilting this way, you're tilting that way. And like to physically approach it, I mean, you kind of just see what your specific voice can do. And then like, I mean, between opera and most other things, it's just like not singing in your head voice. And basically kind of, I don't know, just stylistically, I think for pop stuff, it's a lot of imitation or just like kind of doing covers and everything. And I'm sure there are ways to train in that style. Like, does Berkeley do like pop voice lessons?
I think they do. They have like a whole rock pop umbrella that they can really do that sort of stuff. And that kind of really quick, I just wanted to make a quick little comment about like how much of that bad stigma for like pop rock and theater singers comes from just the fact that they might not necessarily be properly trained by a professional, and that's really sad to kind of see that, because if you took any essence of not even just proper classical training, but just the idea of working with a coach in that regard of maintaining your vocal health, how much would that stigma then properly be erased? And that's always really interesting. So, Angie?
Yeah, I love this question. I get asked this question by almost every prospective student I have. For me, the technique is all the same. Bel canto singing has been tried and true, is the healthiest form of vocal production for several hundred years now.
Yeah.
You know,
so why not use it for heavy metal?
Why not use it? So for me, I always have myself or my students, we warm up in that classical style. And you know, we're not singing Italian. It's mostly just vowels anyway. I wish I could teach my students to sing in Italian. Some of them like it, but
someday.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, my experience is kind of silly because in college and high school, I sang alto because I could read music and because I had good ears. Like I could hear the harmony and keep my part. So they always had me sing in alto. And then, so my low register is really solid. And I think that alone has allowed me to continue to belt healthily because I spent a lot of time in my basement of my range. Even though I'm like a higher soprano, I can still like below the staff, I still got a chest in there. And for me, it's the crossing over happens with a few simple things, which is placement of the voice, which kind of what Richard was going off of, but not keeping it so high in your head, thinking more like in the mask and in your chest, and vowels. It sounds so cheesy and corny, but
it's true.
It's so true. My students,
how much mileage you could get out of vowel modification. Just tweak that E a little bit, and all of a sudden you could hit like a fifth higher than what you normally can do.
Yeah, or even just for a style. Like I love teaching "Take Me Home, Country Roads." I am not a country music fan, but I love that song. It's a great song. And so I teach it, you know, how would you sing it normal? And then I ask, do you want to add the twang or not? And, you know, some students would be like, ooh, I can add the twang. I'm like, yeah, it's so easy. I'm like, you know,
that's awesome.
You sing on the vowel, right? I think of David Devaney, sing on the vowel.
Yeah.
All the time. But country music is one that, particularly with the diphthong, which is a vowel sound that has two sounds back to back. In classical singing, you're going to hold that first vowel.
Right. Eliminate the diphthong at all costs. Yep. Make it as invisible and inaudible as possible. But in country, it's the opposite.
Invert it. Yeah, that's it.
The other way around. Hit the diphthong and just ride on that as long as you can.
I, instead of I. That's it. That's it.
That's a really simple difference.
It's those little things. And that's what makes it so fun for me. It's kind of like I'm a little mechanic. You're like, oh, let's tweak this. Now what happens? Okay, now let's do this. What happens?
Yeah, like a mad scientist. Like
I just
ingredients.
It was really funny you mentioned the vowel thing because sometimes my best friend in the entire world, who is also my accompanist in undergrad, and she's already working on Broadway because she's amazing and she's like
nice
composer and she's got her foot in the door and she's like everything empty. She wants to be like a music director for Broadway stuff. Cool. I plug her everywhere I go. Check her out. Her name is Reagan Castile. Anyway, I'll send her things when I do MT. Try to do MT stuff, and she'll always be like, she's just like, you gotta just change the vowels. Like the vowels are what give you away in the opposite direction too, because if it's like
you can tell you're a classically trained opera singer.
If anything's like too pure, like, or I mean everything at its basis is pure, but like that's how you tell, like that's the difference in the articulation and diction and everything. But yeah, just the little things tweaking, and that's not a lot what coaches do. They'll hit on all of your vowel issues in any style, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Personally, I've had a lot of fun crossing into different genres. Like I'm going to eventually release them on my YouTube. We'll get there. But I have like five or six pop songs.
When that comes, we'll plug them on our channel for you.
Yeah.
We'll put them in the description.
We've got cover songs in the works. We got a little jazz. We got a little soul. We got a little R&B. So it's just like, that's been so fun.
I wish I knew more about jazz.
Oh, same. I was gate kept from it a lot in college. And that's a whole nother episode that we could talk about.
Yeah.
No, you're not wrong.
That's one of our subpoints on the whole classical shtick is like how jazz, how much jazz really has in common, and like why the fact that there is this humongous barrier between those two is kind of a mystery, at least for a lot of us young professionals.
Fabulous jazz program at Eastman, and a lot of singers would cross over and sing and do jazz stuff, and I was always just like, that's
really cool.
That's awesome.
Jaw on the floor, yeah. Yeah, well, I can't speak so much as a professional, but going more onto this kind of stylistic thing. I mean, for me, like I kind of took, like I did like the vocal minor prerequisites as an undergrad and into grad, and then I ended up just kind of keep rolling with it because I ended up getting like all the piano majors had you had to do like so many semesters of private voice training, and I fell in love with the teacher. I thought she was awesome, and I was like, I just want to keep going. So I took like 2 extra years worth of lessons. I was like, I just want to keep going and learn all kinds of stuff. And then I started teaching voice, and that led to I wanted to take more lessons. And then when I did grad, I worked as a vocal accompanying TA. So I was like right there, like secondhand voice lessons with all of like the major professors at the university, and like working with all of their students and even running some of the lessons, especially at Westchester. A lot of the faculty at the time were really active performers. So, a lot of time teacher X or teacher Y would be like away for a week, and they're like, oh, just have the TAs run the lessons. And it's like, I can't teach these guys, but I learned how to teach them. That was a big part of it. But like for me, like I had like a really, over the course of that many years, a pretty rich background. And like, I consider myself a classically trained singer, and for all the choir experience I did and whatnot, but I've always been a rock guy at heart. So like a lot of my application of it comes into like singing rock and metal, especially in karaoke at bars. Before COVID, I was going like every week. There's a few bars around my area that like, for me, it's like fun just to get up and practice and learn to sing in a rock style. And like so many times, like if I had like a friend or even like a student, sometimes I'd take like an adult student with me, like, oh, let's go sing karaoke together. It's a great way to just get out there and have fun and do something in a low pressure environment. It's great practice. No one cares. Everyone's, at the bar, of course. So there's no pressure. It's not like you're really performing under any stakes. So why not just do it? So we did. And a lot of times I would get critiques from, colleagues, friends, and students. And it's like, we could always tell that like, you have this like really, really refined classical style in your singing, and you kind of lack some of that fire and kind of rage that like a lot of rock singers you're trying to emulate do. And it's really interesting how like just merely by learning to modify vowels, learning to modify tones, that goes into like the Estel vocal model, is like having like the different types of tones you can create. That stuff just fascinates me, and it's really amazing how little I know about it after studying it all for so long and using it so much in my teaching. But like how much of it just comes down to experimenting with basics. It's really a very core basic thing, and that's just fascinating for me. But we're getting way off topic here. We are so far in left field. I love it, but we should probably move on.
Yeah,
so
we might want to move on now before I start like the Geddy Lee or the John Anderson impression, because it's not going to end well. Okay? I still have no idea how John Anderson sings that high. Anyway, the point is that we're kind of getting back around to it somewhat, believe it or not. I guess really, and even for the instrumental side or the vocal side, like how do you begin to implement like those techniques into teaching, even in a public school setting where like time is obviously of the essence because there's always a concert coming up at some point. How do you do that? What's your main goal in mind as you go through that? What would be like I'm under a time crunch, I have a concert coming up, and I want to make sure this technique, it's important that it gets taught. How do you do that? I just stuffed like 5 questions into one question. So let's go with that.
Yeah, I guess maybe Angie, we could start.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's funny, when I saw this question, I've been thinking about it almost all day.
Oh boy.
Get ready, guys.
I can't wait to hear this.
Well, I just think it's an interesting question because, I'm not in a classroom. So I was thinking like, how would I do this if I were to like come in? I think you go about this a couple different ways. I won't put a number on it. I think the biggest benefit of learning to sing for any instrument is the breath.
Yep.
I want to quote the late, great Jesse Norman. Singing is a physical, emotional, spiritual, intellectual expression of my breath. Those are Jesse Norman's words, and I think they're just profound because while, you know, operatic singing seems larger than life, it doesn't matter what you're singing. And it doesn't matter, even if you're just speaking, the breath is what unites people. And I think breathing at all, but most importantly in an ensemble setting, breathing together. That, it doesn't matter what instrument you play, if you're a violinist, if you're a percussionist, if you're a saxophonist, if you're a singer, if everyone's breath is together, it's just going to put you up on that next level. Okay. Whether you even be a pianist, knowing when their singer is going to breathe and breathing with them automatically is going to stick these musicians on the same level. So for me, in the school, it's all about that breath. So even if you take part of your warm-up, if you're not already doing a breathing exercise in your warm-up and really enforcing that low breath, the slower exhalation, maintaining the intercostals and maintaining the diaphragm, that alone is going to draw parallels to every single instrument and every single ensemble setting. Yeah,
regardless of genre or style. You're absolutely right. I agree with that 100%.
How I feel very strongly. It doesn't matter. I have a 9-year-old. She's still doing lip trills. She's still doing the exercises because she's the one that needs the breath the most. It's just got to be a habit.
Yeah.
So then for me, I think another thing would be really fun is having a guest artist come. And I particularly am thinking of like what people call a teaching artist, at least over here. I don't know if that's a national term or not, is having somebody demonstrate not only like, it doesn't even need to be opera or classical, it's singing a song and then being like, okay, let me break this down for you. Because sometimes students need that kind of shiny gem of something new, and then they might glean something else off of it. So those are my two things. Definitely the breath being the biggest. If I were a classroom teacher, I'll rue the day that I don't teach my students how to breathe well.
Yeah, well, that's never going to happen. It's a given that you will always do that as long as you're teaching.
Yeah. Well, and I think too,
that, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it also affects speaking. I know so many teachers who have had to have surgery because they have nodules or polyps or some extreme fatigue or injury to their voice. That is not, the damage is not incurred from singing. It's incurred from speaking incorrectly.
Badly.
Yeah.
Again, back to that breath. So.
And it also ties right back into the Estel model of, you know, using your proper speaking voice that's not creating any unnecessary chafing of the true or false folds, and being able, and even like when I was doing the Estel training, they had like a program that targeted student teachers. Like teachers are like some of the most prone people to damaging their voices and needing voice therapy later in life. So here's a whole survey study program we're doing. We're letting student volunteers, and they gave us like an app on your phone that you had to like record yourself at the start and end of everyday student teaching, and like learn to reuse your voice and like use your new voice instead of your old voice, and avoid scratch and fry and like all these little things. And then once you get turned onto those details, you start noticing it in your own speaking, and it drives you nuts. And I love having that conversation with private students, and then they're like, oh my God, I caught myself having scratch when I was talking to my mom today and I hated it. I'm like, good, get rid of it and stop using it.
Yeah, my teacher in undergrad used to give us 3 fries before he would throw us out the window.
That's awesome.
You'd only do it 3 times, and he'd be like, 1.
I love that.
Yeah, but yeah, I absolutely agree. I was going to say the same thing. Breathing, I think, is something that's thankfully enough pretty universal that you can address in a classroom setting, that you don't have to hear each individual voice to kind of address. And then I guess building on top of that, not that it's necessarily vocal technique, and it definitely applies to all art forms, but just I feel like they don't, in an ensemble or choir setting, I feel like not enough people emphasize artistry in the way that you could, that I think actually ultimately would result in some better techniques naturally for a lot of people. I think sometimes, especially since it's your body and how you are interacting and engaging with the music physically changes the way you sing it. I think even just telling them that like if you are enjoying this actually, or feel connected to it actually, a very personal way, your body will respond. And that's something that I've even learned through even solo singing. Like, you have to sing things you love. And you will know if you don't love it, and it will absolutely change the process. I'm sure it's the same for playing. But yeah, I feel like as an ensemble or choir, now, I loved my choir directors in high school, but I feel like they could have been more like, why are we doing this? Like, why this piece? Like, what about this piece that speaks to you as an individual? Because sometimes it's hard when you're singing as a choir. You kind of feel like, okay, I'm here.
Yeah, just doing this thing in Latin or whatever. Like, what is
this
this
language? Oh, that's the other thing. Languages are like the most crucial part of this entire thing. I'm kind of nerdy and obsessed with them and got some learners because of that. But had I known in high school how crucial language was and like how cool, somebody should have been like, this stuff's important. Instead of you're just like lobby most yeah.
It's funny, the irony of what you're saying. In a lot of cases, teachers always feel this kind of like incessant pressure from like the higher ups, like, oh, we have to deliver because the students have to perfect this material for the concert. And like, I feel like taking that time back and just focusing on why this is important and actually having an intelligent, mature conversation with my middle school or high school ensemble and generating some of that genuine interest can really go a long way to achieving my educational goals. And it's funny how like the thing that would make most of the difference is taking that step back and like, let's just talk about this, or let's just kind of, let's talk about why this is fun or whatever. And that can sometimes make the biggest difference in the world. And it goes completely like away from like teaching content and like doing exercises and drilling and doing extra reps of the material. I know I had that conversation a number of times with my cooperating teacher when I was in the middle school choir, because there's that, you have 40 minutes to rehearse with your 8th graders, and that's all you get. You get them like once every 3 days, and it's like we got to cover like 10 different songs. And so many times we had that conversation, like, you should take the next time they come in next Tuesday, have them just sit down on the floor and rework it. Don't do a rehearsal. Teach them in a much different way. I mean, the guy I worked with was amazing, remarkable teacher and really, really effective. And he always challenged me to like do those sorts of things, because I was always like, let me just go right to the piano and just pound all this stuff out and let them hear what they're supposed to do, and that'll work. And part of it worked sometimes. I had some really successful rehearsals, but I also had some where like they weren't opening their mouths, or they weren't doing good technique, or I was like, so they could hear me, I was just like going all in and like using my full voice because I can sing some of the higher stuff. And it's like, dude, that modeling is terrible for a middle school choir. You can't do that. Even if you could hit those notes, don't do it, because they're going to go off of what they hear you doing. And I'm rambling, but that whole point of like taking that step back and not doing as much of like the work related effort and making it more of a play thing can really, I think, lead to some really profound realizations for your students. And that's a really, really interesting point that I always forget. I'm so like back to like, I just want to play and do stuff. And,
yeah.
That's interesting though.
I mean, you make a good point. I mean, when it comes time for like how programs tend to pick material, and I mean, obviously all of you have dealt with this in some way, shape, or form. Whenever it's a holiday concert, it's easier stuff or whatever you're going to do. Like I know my high school personally, we had a tradition of performing the Hallelujah Chorus every winter concert because, it's a tradition. And, something like that, it's always kind of interesting because so much of the time that I remember as a student was spent learning that. And I'm like, it's not exactly an easy piece of music, to say the least. But, like at my high school, it was 10th through 12th because we had a huge amount of students. Like our full choir was 200 plus.
Whoa.
Same.
Which is like
we had 12.
Yeah, I went to a huge high school too.
Gotcha. No, but I mean, like that was the thing, is that like every chorus class was like 45 to 60 students. And I'm like, that's a crazy amount of students to teach a heavy duty piece of music. And like time for technique teaching, it's really like, okay, I have like 10 seconds for a teachable moment, so now's the time to do it. And, myself personally, I kind of like the concept of like heavier duty pieces of music, save them for the spring concert, because you can spend more time teaching that technique. But it's like, it's such a crunch in there that like, I think like if you spend more time teaching like how to and the technique, and the other part of it is that like knowing how to do something better kind of makes it more fun, because you don't feel like you're struggling in the process of doing it. I feel like that gets lost in all of that as we're, like picking out music to do. And that's a big part of it too. Like I had a band teacher of mine years ago when I was in marching band. we had a particularly not so great performance at one competition. And after the next one, we worked hard for the week and pretty much scored way higher than we expected for the next one. He looked to us and said, "It's fun to be good, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yeah, it kind of is." And I'm like, that technique is really important for that. And as crass as that may be as like a general statement in terms, not crass, I should say, as strong and maybe not quite a nuanced statement as that may be, that's a really good point. And that technique part goes a long way in helping to actually develop that, because you wouldn't want to be out there struggling to figure out what you're doing if the technique would help to make it a lot easier. And the quicker you get better at it, the more you're going to enjoy it, no matter what type of piece of music it is. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part of it too. And the funny part is, like, I think you guys are doing my job for me at this point, getting to the next part of what we're doing. This is going to be the fun one. Since this is a new segment for everybody, just so you guys know, this is a grind my gears segment for music education. And I have been waiting to do something like this for such a long time. I'm going to restrain myself and not talk about recorders because that could be a whole nother 40 minutes and I don't want to bore.
That's going to be an episode. The best ways to, what was it, Russ? Properly burn a recorder?
Oh, yeah. I think I sent you two titles. The first one was just dripping with sarcasm, where it said recorders, great instrument or the best instrument. And the other one was basically like recorders, best melting or burning methods. Either are both perfectly valid.
That's going to be an episode coming soon. Absolutely. So let's start with our guests. Whether, and at this point, we're kind of like through specifically talking vocal peds. So if you want to, like, anything about the education scene in general that you find that kind of irks you or bothers you that you'd want to change, if you had a final say on like something that should be done, whether that be in schools or with private teachers, maybe it is something vocally specifically. So
yeah, basically something that's like an issue or that you personally are like, this drives me insane. I have to like say something about
this. Is going to be so much fun in every episode. I can't wait to hear what all of our guests are going to say. I'm so psyched.
Angie, do you want to start us off first?
Sure. I feel like I have like a very serious one.
Okay.
But I also have like a silly one.
Okay, let's hear them both.
Okay. So let's do serious first.
Okay.
Art is a part of the human experience. All of it, all art, performing art, visual art, audible art. I think it should be viewed as essential in the in the education grand scheme of things. It breaks my heart to see so much of it. Oh, actually, kind of dovetailing into this, it's ridiculous to me that people constantly consume music and art and yet don't think it's important. I guess it's kind of what I'm getting off of.
Don't value.
What I'm really trying to say. Especially take quarantine.
Yeah, I was going to say,
who's out of work first?
Factor it into COVID, and there
who's out of work
the
longest?
Yeah.
We are.
Mm-hmm.
What are people doing right now? Watching TV,
art,
listening
shows,
to music,
to
watching shows. Oh my God. You know, one of my favorite musicians right now, he does like live streams every Sunday afternoon. And I'm like, yeah, so excited every Sunday. I'm like, yes. So that's my serious one. My silly one is, over the course of the last year and a half, I have attempted to use hot cross buns and Here Comes the Bride as, examples of what a step sounds like or what a rhythm looks like or what an interval is. And none of my kids know what it is.
Really?
So whatever classroom teachers are teaching their kids to tell them what a perfect fourth is now, can you please tell me? Please? Because I need to know.
Let us know in the comments. Tell us in the comments, because we're struggling over here.
Yeah. Also,
I do one of two things for that one. So partially because I'm a Star Wars nerd, I'll explain that in a second, but I still use Here Comes the Bride because it's the easiest one to hear. But some students who are younger may not know, like, what's Here Comes the Bride? I'm like, have you ever been to a wedding? No, never
What's
mind.
a wedding?
So the Star Wars nerd in me says it's like the few opening notes, bum, 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 bum. And then the other part of me teaches the perfect fifth by bum, 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 that part. And I'm like, all right, Star Wars works. They all know what it is. So it's
Star Wars also works for a major third, right? With the Imperial March. Bum, bum,
it does.
Bum, bum,
yeah, see, and yet Danton is not a big John Williams fan.
Yeah, but that's another episode. We'll talk about him later.
Also, in the comments, what Disney shows are your children watching? Because no one knows Mulan or Pocahontas or any of the classics. They're like,
I can tell you that. They're all watching Frozen too.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing wrong with that. Frozen and Frozen 2 are
This is
fantastic.
what I want to sing. We could be like, we could do Part of Your World, and they are all like Into the Unknown, which is a whole different beast.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you
But,
can't have just any singing student jump right into the unknown. There's no way.
That's the start of that's the earliest Disney movie. I guess maybe Tangled.
Yeah, and that's really a shame. No one talks about Beauty and the Beast anymore. Even stuff in The Lion King. I mean, for me, like, it's bad when I was shocked that I had a pair of students request "Can You Feel the Love Tonight?" I'm like, wait, you guys have actually listened to the music in The Lion King? And like, oh my God, we're not doing something from Frozen?
Oh, this is how I explain who Phil Collins is, because he's the guy that did the music from Tarzan. And here I am trying to figure out like all the Robin Williams impressions for all his singing numbers in Aladdin.
Yeah, Aladdin. That's, oh man.
But no, I mean, that's a kind of a really good point about, just how you teach those intervals, because like a lot of kids come into school not knowing, like, you expect, like, all right, so what songs do you think you're going to know when you come to school? Like, like Itsy Bitsy Spider, or like Row, Row, Row Your Boat, or like
Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
You can never be sure if they're going to know it or not. And I think the interesting part is that, and I'm not going to go way too far into this, at some point, I oddly enough kind of credit that to the fact that we don't have a whole lot of people who participate in like communal activities of singing, a la a church type of ceremony, if you will. I mean, that's like I said, that's a whole nother can of worms I'm not going to be getting into today. But I know when like I was a kid, like some of my first singing choirs I was in was at a church. Or I know for my parents, some of their first vocal experiences as a kid was singing at church. In which case you kind of learn, like, albeit, for everybody kind of eventually figuring out how to crowdsource the correct pitch, at least you kind of learn the basics of like, how do you match a pitch to make sure it sounds correct? How do you like teach your kids how to sing? And most of the time, that's really kind of a shame, because like you're basically starting from scratch. You're assuming they know absolutely nothing. And you're right. Like, what do you use to teach intervals? I mean, my first teacher that taught us how to actually figure out intervals and gave us examples was in 10th grade. For a music fundamentals class, like a very first theory. And like some of them are the basic ones, like Here Comes the Bride for a Fourth, but some of them were fun ones, like the theme from the late 1980s Batman movies, where Michael Keaton was Batman, for a minor sixth, or major sixth was The Simpsons, bum 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 ba-dum, that kind of stuff. And like those kind of things are great, but it's really tough to find out what they know as a basic set of knowledge as they're walking in, because like not only do you have to teach them intervals, you have to teach them that too. So yeah, that's a very, very fantastic point.
Good gripes. I love me some good gripes.
I did want to say something about your serious point as well, which is that you're absolutely correct. I find it kind of astounding, like the kind of general just lack of credit we give to artists for actually like giving us stuff to enjoy in our lives,
stuff to consume on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think part of it is because there's this general idea that like art is something we get to consume for free, and I'm not
that's a whole different issue there,
if you will, given what we're putting this up on. But at the same time, it's an interesting situation, because we've all kind of become accustomed to this concept of I can listen to anything I want for free. I literally just look it up on YouTube. And I think the detriment there is that it kind of teaches people the wrong idea that like art is something that you can
take
just
it for granted
have for free.
Yeah.
We've all seen the memes. Can I pay my rent with exposure?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. So let's go over to Rachel. What are some of your gripes with music or education scene?
Gripes. I guess I also have a serious and a somewhat silly.
Let's do the serious one first.
Let's do serious first. Okay, my current and should have been prior gripe, I guess, with our industry in general, and I guess with most industries, is just like the perspective that music and music history was like a white guy's narrative, and we just have a bunch of old white men that we constantly teach. So is there a way, like, if we could just introduce, even from a young age in music ed, like BIPOC composers? Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like, that would be, yeah.
Imagine more than just one demographic being involved in the arts.
Involved in the arts.
What a novel idea.
And Yeah, I mean, especially I just feel like currently I'm kind of frustrated because it seems like the realization has been made by a lot of like big opera companies and bigger like institutions in general that this like inherent racism is an issue, but it feels like, I know like the change can't happen immediately, but I feel like a lot of the difference that people are claiming to make is a little surface level, and I just like, it's a huge issue, and obviously like a statement is a beginning, but it would be, I'm interested to see how this actually turns into some serious change. People can talk a lot and not make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to, here's a plug. My friend, I'll maybe give the link somewhere in this somehow if that's possible, has created like a pledge system where you can pledge for yourself or your university or wherever system that you're involved with that you will perform various, however many works by BIPOC composers in the next season, and then tons of materials and information about where you can find composers of color, music, sheet music, buy from Black-owned businesses, sheet music, all this stuff. So it's a really good resource. So I will plug that. I forget if it has an actual name. I don't know. My silly gripe is, I guess it's very kind of university central, but studio rivalry, that's dumb. It's like it feels like everyone's in a different Harry Potter house, and like you aren't going to your team, and like
but all the different houses are in the same school and they're all learning magic.
So, yeah, exactly.
So what difference does it make?
Exactly. That was yeah, I think that exists kind of everywhere, and it's kind of inherent when you're in a competitive art form. But we're all learning, like, I don't know, ways to kind of circumvent that. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, you and me both there, kid. I feel exactly the same way. It's frustrating.
Instruments and all over the place.
Especially, at least at Westchester, we had 4 voice teachers, so there were 4 studios that you could be in.
Yeah, and then I'm sure there was some kind of class system with that. Like you were looked at a certain way if you were in this teacher's studio and whatever. Like I got some of those vibes being a TA because I got to bounce into each and every studio, and I kind of saw that.
You could probably guess.
Yeah, I can definitely guess. And it's really a shame because all 4 of them were fantastic. I thought they were all great teachers in their own ways, and they all had their different strengths and weaknesses. And I felt really fortunate to be able to work firsthand with all 4 of them in a limited extent. I thought it was awesome.
This is one of those things where being a percussionist actually gave us a bit of an advantage because we held studio with everybody together, including all the teachers. But drummers, we're kind of
the percussion world was a lot more open and laid back and awesome.
We're a special breed, to say that.
You are.
You could say that about every.
Is that like, you know, for so many of us, because our experience is, I won't say it's vastly different, but it is very removed in like how you participate and, you know, what you really do with the instrument and how you, you know, interact with it. A lot of us, it's kind of like just being part of a big family of sorts, and doesn't matter who's doing what. It's like, yeah, man, I played set for this one show, and it was awesome. We had all these great players. Like, that's fantastic, man. I want to go see you play at that, you know? Like,
it was a much bigger sense of community and camaraderie than I think any other studio can speak for.
We have fun.
At least in our experience at the school we went to.
Right? Do you go with the perk lingo? Like, I have a really good friend who's a percussionist, and they just scream perk at each other when they see each other.
That is such a drummer thing to do.
I know.
Not necessarily that, but I can tell you that we literally have our own language for like how to actually say drum parts as we read through them.
Nice.
If you hang around like anybody who's ever been in marching band long enough, you'll start hearing like another language for like every different kind of rhythm. So we definitely have that kind of stuff going on. But yeah, we kind of do have our own lingo to some extent. But yeah, it's a lot of it is like drum corps marching band based, but it's kind of fun. We live in our own world. It's kind of like looking at like the whole of music history the way we're typically taught, and we're like Spain off in the Iberian Peninsula where like nobody talks about us except for the guitar. So, you know, yeah, that's kind of how that works.
I would like to reassure Rachel that once you're done with school, it's much better.
Yeah.
It's not like that. At least if you find the right communities. Some of them are still very competitive and very catty.
If you can't find them, make them.
Yeah.
Right.
Make them
I have
yourself.
a wonderful, wonderful like support system and group of friends. It's mostly, I think, it's like institution, and it was much worse in undergrad. I've only been here for like 2 months, but anyway.
I feel like it's like the plot of like a bad movie, like, you know, like you're like the new person on the campus, and you have like this one person like, this is my studio, and I'm the one who's going to be like, you know, graduating the top of the class, and you know, it's like you have like this like cheesy movie villain that you're having to write.
I love it, because I used to study with a tenor, so we were in like a very male heavy studio, and there were only like 2 girls, and it was a definite like certain vibe where we were like, they would like be our protective older brothers. And now my studio is entirely women, and literally for the second half of studio we just have girl talk and cry.
I love that.
Having that drastic change of dynamic must be really eye-opening.
Yeah.
You know, for you week to week. That must be really interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad I got to experience both.
I would imagine it makes it like super conducive to just getting more done or learning more without like having all the extra stuff to have to worry about, you know?
Yeah. Oh, and even like, this is way off topic, but even just like for the pedagogically, like studying with a woman, that's something I really wanted to do in my master's, because I don't think there's any issue with studying with a man, but I think at a certain point, it's really good to have someone who's,
if you're working like with someone in the same voice range as you, there's a lot more you can connect with. Absolutely.
Yeah. And just like breathing is so different for guys and girls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even just the basic manipulation of the larynx is different, because you know, what happens when the voice changes is different from gender to gender.
Right.
Yeah. I felt like when I studied very briefly with a baritone, and I learned way more about artistry and about phrasing and about non-technical things from that teacher. Probably because he realized, you know, I really don't know. We got good things going on technically here. Let's worry about the other stuff.
Yeah, I know singing, but I don't know her anatomy, right?
But yeah, and I think now, especially that I study with someone who is, I mean, my voice teacher refuses to fach me right now. She won't tell me what my voice type is because I'm a baby. And but I assume that we have very similar voice types, and so I think she's able to give me a lot of more very personalized instruction technically, because we're very similar voice types, and we have sung a lot of the same rep, things like that. So
yeah, just like even a similar knowledge base and familiarity. Makes a difference.
Well, I think we're getting pretty much down there to the end, but I know I wanted to give you both an opportunity. If there was anything you wanted to promote that you're going to be a part of, or any kind of, you know, obviously if you're teaching, you'd like to promote where, you know, you can find information about, you know, the services that you offer. I figured I'd give you both the chance to do that, just as a thank you for coming on the podcast, and also because we basically had you here talking to us for like a good, I don't know, hour and a half at this point. So it only seems fair to me to do that. Rachel, do you want to go first?
Sure. I have a website. It's just rachelkobernick.com. And feel free to follow my professional Facebook page. It's Rachel Kobernick, soprano. And there's information about voice lessons and stuff on there. In terms of things coming up, things are kind of on hold. So
for obvious reasons. But
come the spring, we should have some shows going on here, but that's all through CCM. So
awesome.
Angie?
Okay, so yeah, I also have a website. It is my full name, which is angelicagrausoprano.com. I'm sure I'll have it in the description, so for spelling. Yeah, I teach privately out of my home in the greater Boston area. So if you are looking for a teacher that's either, you know, virtually many states away or whatever, not in Pennsylvania. I assume that all of you guys are still in PA, but I'm not sure.
Well, Russell and I are. Rachel's in Cincinnati for school.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for a teacher, I like to think that I'm very fun and judgment-free. I find a lot of my students love that about me. I also want to plug, I have one virtual opera that it's in the production process now. I've done my recording. It's super fun. It's going to be through this local opera company called Due Donne Productions.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yes. So they have pivoted for a virtual season this year, and we are doing a really great and super fun animation for their operas. They've already done one, Hansel and Gretel, and the one that I'm going to be a part of is Cendrillon by Massenet Cinderella. They're animating it using Animal Crossing.
Oh, nice.
So it's 30 minutes.
I love that already.
Yeah.
It was great.
And they're doing,
that's awesome.
I'm not in the Orpheus and the Underworld one, but they're doing that one with The Sims 4. And I just think that is so fun.
Yeah, cool.
So definitely,
I'm not doing that.
I don't know. They didn't tell me.
That's crazy.
They just gave me a mic and were like, record this. And I was like, okay.
Okay.
So that's been super fun. Yeah, you can probably subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. I've been trying really hard to upload some more stuff. My pianist friend, Yui Kitamura, and I have been recording. We just released a side-by-side tape of my very first, actually, embarrassingly, it was my very first song I ever performed by a Black composer, and I chose Florence Price. Love her. Look her up. But the song is Night. It's a really gorgeous song. So we got lots of stuff in the works coming out. I'm really looking forward to a wonderful year of mostly virtual music making.
Yeah. Are you doing anything on social media in that regard? You know, I know you're on like Insta and Facebook and stuff like that.
Yeah,
do you have anything that you do like for your studio or for your own performance career on that?
I have mostly just been the art song things. I haven't been thinking too much about opera, honestly. It's just not in the cards right now for me, which is fine. I found this year, I think I want to just take to really get the technique, like practice chops, super solid. I'm not
kind of refine and hone the
audition
craft.
Season this year. I'm not doing it. Bless any singer who is doing auditions this year. Bless your soul and your microphone.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, seriously, good luck. It's making recordings is the most exhausting thing about being at least a classical musician or somebody who specializes in live music. We're not recording artists. It's a really huge undertaking.
Recording classical
a whole
is
different
really
degree. Like doing it from your home should be like you need an AME degree.
Yeah. But I want to plug one more thing.
Yeah,
I volunteered with this group, and it's seriously amazing. Their cause is fantastic. They're called the Women's Chorus. It operates kind of slightly as an umbrella of the Eureka Ensemble. We operate out of Women's Lunch Place, which is one of a very few daytime homeless shelters for female identifying people experiencing homelessness or extreme poverty. So we run a choir and we have chorus for the ladies, and I've been doing it for a year now. Just want to give them a plug because that project has been like the biggest joy for the ladies and for myself, and it's a really great way to give experiences of really great music and art to people who otherwise would not have them. So the Women's Chorus, Eureka Ensemble.
All right,
check them out.
Along those lines, thought of one more thing. My really good friend is running a program, which we'll also link, called What is Opera Anyway? And it's a group of teaching artists. I'm one of them. And it's basically an after-school program for children aged, I think it's like 8 to 15, who have zero exposure or anything to opera. It's like you can enroll at any time, join anytime, in like a 13-week run, I think. It started in September, but feel free to join if you have children or friends with children who are interested. And then I think she's also planning on launching like a lecture series for older interested individuals who don't have any opera experience and want to learn anything about it. There's a Facebook page, an Instagram, and a website. So
follow them on social.
All those
the
things.
Likes are much appreciated.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, like I said before, I believe that will actually draw this episode to a close. So Rachel, Angie, I'd like to thank you for being here. It was awesome to talk with both of you. I definitely learned a lot, considering like out of all of us here, I definitely have the least of what I would call the proper classical voice training. So I definitely learned a lot, which is fantastic. And like I said, thank you for being here. We'd love to have you on again. I hope you both would love to come back, I hope. So in any case, like I said, this is the end of the episode. So for myself, for Danton, for Rachel and Angie, thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of the day.
Peace out.